Greetings, mortals, and welcome. Please present your tickets for validation. Thank you. Your existence has been acknowledged, and you have been granted access every Thursday and Friday. You will be accompanying your guides, Krista and Brandy, along with a world-renowned guest. They will be exploring an intriguing tendril of what humans refer to as reality each week, as they strive to advance you further down the path to the truths of your physical earth and what lies on the other side. Remember to please keep your hands and feet in the vehicle at all times, and do not exit until the craft has come to a complete stop.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome. Hey, Brandy.
Happy Thursday. Right off the bat. Welcome, William. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Most definitely. So, anyway, how's your week been?
I wish I could say it was better. Just having a lot of setbacks and all kinds of stuff going on at the house. But, I'm staying busy. Wearing me out, but we got to do what we got to do.
Yep, I understand. Totally. My week's been a long week too. I've haven't felt good all week, and thank you, Tex. Haven't felt good all week.
Thank you, Tex.
Just trying to do life, make everything work.
Yeah, did you wear yourself out last weekend?
I did. I actually, so Sunday I got home, I don't know, it was like 12:30 or something in the afternoon. I went to bed for about 2 hours because I didn't sleep the night before. And Sunday night I was in bed like 6:30 and I crashed all night long. Didn't wake up at all. You know how those nights are.
I hate being that tired. I always hate being that tired, but I sure do love that sleep when you can sleep like that.
Yeah. Heck yeah. It was a good time though. Ashmore was active and, a lot of people had a good time. Everybody, I think, had a good time. Everybody I spoke to anyway, and tried to speak to everybody. So, yeah.
Right.
A busy weekend. And, we did 3 live shows from over there. As you know, you were on all 3 of them from, Paranormal Paul to Inhumanoids, Barton, Nunnelly, and then finished the night off with Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. So, it's just busy weekend.
It was a busy night for sure.
Mm-hmm. A lot of intelligent spirits, that kind of thing, over there at Ashmore, especially when we were doing some of the Estes methods. That was pretty awesome. So,
yeah, I can't wait to see all that. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Crystal says, I had a wonderful time. Krista, missed you, Brandy.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you.
Yeah.
I miss it too, because you don't know what it was like sitting at home and not being able to go. I was sitting there going, I can't believe I'm sitting at home.
I know, right?
I'm always up for a ghost hunt. I tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. But I got to tell you, we, Bart actually went in and went ghost hunting, which was a shocker. And that was all on him. I never said a word to him. He did it on his own, and which was really cool. And then Josh Hurd, he was awesome as usual. So anyway, we actually have another event in July. It's July 13th. It's Malvern Manor with Josh Hurd, and looking forward to that one. He's an awesome friend of ours, and just a great one to investigate with.
Exactly. So if you would like to go to Malvern Manor in I'll spit it out in a minute, in Iowa, just go to Eventbrite under Blondes and Booze. It should be the first event that pops up for you.
Yep.
So you can go check it out. It's going to be, a great evening. Again, we're going to feed you dinner, and then we're going to ghost hunt. So it's just going to be a great evening altogether. So
actually that night we're going to feed you tacos.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We're having a taco bar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, I hope I can go to that one. Just like,
I hope you go to that one.
I don't want to miss the food. I want food.
Right. There you go. And one thing we got to talk about real quick. How about that, Brandy?
All right. This is the Alabama Bigfoot Conference. This is coming up. And yes, I will be at this one. I do have my brother coming in to relieve me for that weekend. It is June 7th and 8th. June 7th, we're doing the meet and eat. That's what we've been calling it, the meet and eat at Western Sizzlin in Anniston, Alabama. Of course, the room that we had reserved is completely full, but don't worry, we're not closing the doors at all. Just go ahead, have yourself a seat somewhere out in the dining room, eat your dinner, come on in. And we're not turning anybody away that night. The next day, the festivities begin at 9 a.m. And it's going to be a great day of speakers with Bigfoot Michigan Rob, Martin Groves, Greg Ogles, Jason McLean, of course, us, the Blondes and Booze, Daryl Denton, Barton Nunnelly, and our MC for the day is Tex. It's just going to be a great time had by all. It's very affordable. Tickets are $30 online and $35 at the door. And just come, just come. Like I said, it's very affordable. It's going to be a great time.
Yep.
Come on.
Yep. It's going to be a great time. Really looking forward to it for sure. You want to go through the lineup at shows and then let's just get on with it. We'll bring Daniel on up.
Absolutely. On Mondays at 7 p.m. Central, it is Danielle Diva in the Diva Dimension. At 8:15, Texas Front Porch begins with Tex and myself. On Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Central, it is Beyond BMR with his co-host Krista. On Wednesdays at 7 p.m., it's Donnie Cho Says Stuff. At 8 p.m., it is Barton Nunnelly with his wife Letitia Nunnelly, and that's in Humanoids. On Thursdays at 8 p.m. Central, right here, right now, Blondes and Booze. 10 p.m., Monica Rollins begins her show of Our Paranormal World. On Friday at 7 p.m. Central, it is us again with Blondes and Booze. PRT comes on later on that night after we go off. On Saturday at 7 p.m. Central, it is Paranormal Paul in Paranormal Among Us. Don't forget to watch him. And check out Josh on Rumble thereafter. So he's everywhere. He's just everywhere. On Sundays at 5 p.m. Central, it is Truth or Tinfoil with Randy Gilbert and myself. And at 7 p.m., Tex and Danielle Diva release their newest episode of Infamous Minds. And then after that, PRT comes back on again, and check them other times during the week. So you've got plenty to watch if you're bored, you're sick, whatever. You got plenty to watch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And real quick, we'll just thank William, Tex, and Paranormal Pixie. Thank you very much. Appreciate those.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, let's get this show ready and rolling. It looks like Daniel looks ready back there. Let's bring him up. Hello.
There he is.
Hey, guys. Hey, Chris, hey, Brandy.
Yeah, we had to get through the beginning there.
Yeah. It's
good to be on with you guys for the first time.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on for sure.
Right. So,
well, hopefully I'm
coming
through okay.
Lives.
I do live out in the middle of nowhere, so my signal might not hold up so well. Hopefully, I'm coming through okay though.
Yes, we have the same type of living situation. It's out in the country, farmlands. That's what I got. Flat, and sometimes my signal is good and sometimes it isn't, but that's okay. So
actually,
Daniel, we met you first and foremost.
I was just going to say, at this present time, you're both lagging.
I think we are.
You are.
But I these storms that are rolling through, they've got even more rolling through the area. And it's going, I can't even tell you, I have to look at the map again, but they're talking about even more tornadoes and everything coming back in this weekend. And so everybody be careful out there.
Yeah, for sure. I don't. Can you hear us, Daniel?
Yep. I hear you guys. You're lying.
Okay. All right. Go ahead,
I'm like,
Brandy.
are we lagging a little bit? I'm gonna jump out and jump back in to see if it can cure my end.
Okay. That works. She's going to try to jump out and jump back in because her service is awful right now as well. So is it storming where you are, Daniel, or is it just because you live in the middle of nowhere?
Not storming yet. I do live in the middle of nowhere, and that's probably why my connection isn't all that stable. But if I need to go up the road a little bit, I might be able to do that if that helps out at all.
Well, so you're better now. You come in a little better. You said you live out in the middle of nowhere. Do you have any of these crazy creatures around you?
I see some interesting creatures all the time, but none of them all that crazy, pretty normal stuff. Live out in the field, so sorry if you hear any noise back here. My property is getting mowed right now. I didn't know that was going to happen until like a few minutes ago, actually. So I do live in like a field, so I would say that I see a lot of the regular wildlife, coyotes, small vermin, wild dogs and cats and all kinds of insects and things, but no, nothing really out of the ordinary. It's beautiful when it's clear out, or even if it's pretty intense weather with thunderstorms or a clear sky, and so I enjoy it out here, and it's beautiful, it's peaceful, very serene, but where I live, I don't think there's really much of too much unusual activity of anything going on, although someone here in the city I live in had a Bigfoot statue that they put up, which sort of caught a lot of attention for a while, about the last year or so. But they, for whatever reason, took it down, so it's not there anymore. But that was kind of fun for a little while.
Wow.
Why would they do that?
I'm not too sure. It's kind of a strange property, like a ranch that a lot of people drive by on a main road, and so they got one of those Bigfoot statues that you see that a lot of places have, like the one in Jefferson, Texas, or just a lot of other locations. They're the 6'1". They're about 2,000 pounds, and it was off kind of it looks like a little bit of a nature area, so a lot of people would double back and see it as they're driving, kind of catching them off guard. So I would see it being posted around in the local city group page online. But I live south of Fort Worth, so it doesn't sound like I'm all that far out in the country, but it's just not too far from the main city area. But where I am right here, it's kind of out in the country, and the area I live in is a little bit remote, so my internet connection it's spotty, kind of depending on the weather and things. Right now it looks like it's holding up, so hopefully I'm going to be okay for the show.
Awesome, good deal. Brandy, I think earlier you were going to tell him we actually met him, I believe it was Dogman Conference.
Yes. We met you at the Dogman Conference. Yes. Yeah. That was the first time we got to meet you. And then I got to see you just last month in Falk. And it was really good to see you. I mean, I wish you would have got to speak a little more. I know you got to get a couple things in, but I wish I would have got to see you actually speak this time. I didn't get to see you or anything last time or get to talk to you very much.
Yeah, well, it was great to see you again here at the Falk Monster Festival. It's been going on for a few years now. And yeah, the Dogman Conference was really interesting because that was here sort of in my hometown area, Fort Worth, almost a year ago. And so I spoke on UFOs and aliens, facts, fiction, or folklore at the second one. The first one, I ran the AV and did all the equipment and video and things like that for the first one out in Tennessee. So that was a lot of fun. And Josh said when Josh Turner was planning for the second one, he asked if I could come and talk about some of the other topics that probably aren't going to be as notable, at least, for a Dogman themed conference, which is interesting. And at the Falk one, the Falk Monster Festival, I was the MC, so I got to introduce a lot of the people. I didn't give a talk myself there, but I'm fascinated in folklore and urban legends, cryptozoology, stories and tales of creature encounters and strange things like that have always been interesting to me. So it's been a focus of mine and research as well.
Awesome. Good deal. Good deal. So let's talk some UFOs. How did you have an encounter or just interest? How did you get into that topic?
Sure. So I think it's really interesting to see, like right now, the topic of UFOs, or a lot of what's being referred to as UAP, is gaining popularity, mainly because there's a lot of news coverage. There's a lot of things happening in Congress with government, and things that are really helping to spread awareness about the topic in certain areas. But it's something that's really been studied and looked at as far as the study of UFOs, or some people refer to the subject and field of ufology as a way for people to really know that there is a history of reports of sightings of unknown aerial phenomena for years. And it's something that has been interesting to me for over the last decade. And I actually don't claim to have any incredible experiences or sightings that I use as a sort of a platform to share about or anything. I've seen some weird things, and I have had some weird experiences, but nothing really too substantial that I would say is, worth trying to share to make any sense of or make a reporting of. But it's something that I think I enter into a lot of these fields as a researcher. And about 2008 here, it was in the beginning of 2008, not too far from where I live, there was an enormous UFO sighting over in Stephenville, Texas. And it made the news. It was something that got national media coverage, and it was a huge situation that actually the local joint air base here in Fort Worth sent out some F-16s, and that was initially not really acknowledged. But this was something that, when it comes to UFOs, we call a flap, which was an enormous sighting, something that not just one person saw. And I should make it clear, I didn't see the object. It was something reported widely in the news at the time. And many people in the town of Stephenville did. Law enforcement, civilians, a number of people who reported seeing a large, mile-wide object just going from horizon to horizon effortlessly, and eventually pursued by F-16s, as many as up to about 10. And the local air base here actually denied having anyone up in the sky for a while, until they said, yes, we had 2 jets, 2 fighters up there. Then that became like 6. And then finally they said, yeah, we had up to about 10. And so that got my interest. I had already been interested in science and physics and cosmology, the study of the universe, and how, all of these interesting things we hear about space and exploration, all of those things. I was reading Carl Sagan and a lot of his literature in high school. And a few years after that is really just when the Stephenville incident happened. And so at that time, I began looking into different reports of sightings here in the area that maybe coincided, or other accounts, historic reports, things like that. So a few years later, 2010, I started to look into organizations that were here in my local area around the DFW Metroplex. And I found out that there were some interesting groups. I was amassing a small library at the time, which has since become an enormous collection, some of which you can see here behind me. And some of the books that I was getting into and reading were by a man named Jim Marrs. And I saw that he was going to be giving a talk and presentation here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And this was back in 2010. So I thought, that's kind of in my neighborhood. I'll go check that out, because I was reading some of his material and it caught my interest. And I thought, this is an investigative journalist who's willing to attempt to tackle pretty controversial topics and do what he can to try to shed light on some of these difficult issues that not a lot of people were willing to engage with. So I thought that was really interesting. It wasn't really just hearsay. It wasn't really just crazy conspiracy ideas that were unsubstantiated. He was documenting, citing, and sourcing a lot of the things that he was presenting in his research. So I think that with the integrity that someone like Jim Marrs presented, I felt like that's someone who I think it would be worthwhile to go out of my way to try to go listen to a talk and maybe see if I can meet him and learn more. It ended up being with a group called EPIC, which was an acronym. At the time, the group was pretty active. It was called Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council. And I got involved with that group and started working with Jim, because he was a member of that group as well, and found out he lived here in the area. So in 2010, that's really when I got started with more serious research and organization studies. And so basically, I started to work with Jim at that point and other groups here in the area. And soon after, I met a number of other individuals and people who were involved with other studies like cryptozoology. So I soon got connected with a few other friends and people who you guys may know as well, like Nick Redfern, Ken Gerhardt, Lyle Blackburn. And so I've known those guys since then, and we'd worked together in various capacities. And so it's been really interesting. And along the way, I've been involved with different research, different investigations into a number of different historical cases. And so I enter into all of this, again, as a researcher. I don't claim to have any extraordinary experiences that I think anyone would be too impressed by or anything, but I'm fascinated by people who do have accounts of such experiences and who are willing to share. And so I've done the little that I can in an effort to contribute to these fields like ufology and cryptozoology, and have been on expeditions in search of these elusive creatures and things that are purported to exist, and looking into interesting reports and sightings of unknown aerial phenomena, or UFOs, which some people will now call UAP. And of course, alongside that, the tangential subject of alien life forms and this idea of extraterrestrials is always intriguing. But I'm careful also to not conflate the two ideas, because a lot of people get the misconception that UFO means alien spaceship. And I think we have to be cautious not to conflate or confuse the two ideas together, because it's interesting to consider the possibility that maybe that there are visitors from somewhere else, or that maybe we're not alone here in this interesting world. But I think it's also good to consider that there are a lot of prosaic explanations, and that there are probably much more simple things that are happening rather than really exotic things. Sometimes I think that people want things to be more exotic. And so I should also clarify, I am a skeptic, but not in the disregarding sense. I don't say that in a way that I think is simply to be disregarding of what people are sharing, but I say that I'm a skeptic because I'm curious. I'm interested to know why people are sharing the things that they do. And I think it's important to approach a lot of this with critical thinking and to be level-headed, and to not buy into sensationalism, because there's a lot of noise out there, and it's tough to sift through some of that to make what are really interesting claims and stories. And I think that looking into the historical record is fascinating, because accounts of mysterious phenomena that dates back, if not, just since the beginning of known history, but really kind of coming up into closer time frame of what's going on today. I think that it's been really interesting to see how, there are a lot of really important things I think that are happening, historical things really, when it comes to the subject of UFOs and the acknowledgement that it's receiving at a national and perhaps international level. And I'll just summarize that my initial interest in a lot of this also stems from two local legends here in the area. Of course, that sort of kind of falls into the areas of interest that I'm really focused on, which the first one I'll just share is the Lake Worth monster. And that's a fun story of maybe not fun exactly, but it's a really interesting and sort of mysterious story of this strange encounter. Maybe it's not a cryptid at all, but this idea of something that was witnessed by not just one or two people, but 30 to 40 people, also referred to as the Goat Man. And this was here in the Fort Worth, Lake Worth area, not too far from where I live. And this was something that was making the news in 1969, when my good friend, the late Jim Mars, was writing in the local newspaper about it after it had sort of made a rash of sightings there in Lake Worth. It was something that, while most of the world was focused on humans going to the moon, here we are in Texas hunting down monsters near Fort Worth. So it was really interesting. And of course, the other big one, which has been a focus of mine for several years now, is the Aurora legend, which is an airship story dating back to the late 1800s that deals with the crash of a ship along with the subsequent burial of its pilot, which is kind of considered to be an alien. It was quoted in the newspaper. And I regard that one simply as folklore. I should make it clear, because people get the misconception that this really happened or that it's an outright hoax. And I should say that I've looked at it extensively in both ways, and I've probably done more to dig into this story than most people have at all. And simply because there's so much that's been produced about it. But the Aurora legend has been a focus of mine for a particular research project, and an attempt to chronicle the history of the legend and all the ways it's portrayed in media, all the ways it's been featured in any multimedia for over a century now. So it's something that people have heard about, like on TV or different shows here and there, but it's a fun story. It's kind of interesting and tragic because of a crash, but whether it happened or not, of course, that's still debatable. Some people, and so I approach it as a legend and as folklore for the purposes of preserving the cultural history of the story. And so that's kind of been my focus, alongside a variety of events and traveling. And, I should probably mention I'm an amateur at all of this. I'm not in any way claiming to be an expert or an authority on these subjects. I think that there's really not many people at all. People can be seasoned in research regarding historical cases. I don't really particularly find that there are any experts when it comes to unexplained subjects. And I think that there's, unfortunately, it's a real challenge with personalities being in sort of the limelight rather than perhaps the scientific, quest to understand what these mysteries really are. And so that's where a lot of my interest lies. I think it's important to be open-minded and to approach a lot of these things with a willingness and eagerness to look into it with just withheld judgment and not to presume anything one way or the other, at least for myself, because I'm not an experiencer, but I do talk to people who are. So, while I'm interested in what people have to share, I do what I can to make sense of, practical possibilities and things that are also interesting considerations, and what are the proposed explanations to a lot of these things as well. So I'm fascinated with all the different areas of unexplained when it comes to paranormal, interesting historical mysteries, but also other things dealing with consciousness and those areas as well. So that's kind of where my focus has been for a while.
Well, I do have a question for you, because we've talked about this before amongst the Texas Front Porch team and other people. What do you really think the lake monster was? Do you think that it was Bigfoot? Do you think it was a goat man? What do you think it was?
That is a good question. I think that having been there many times over the years, it is sort of a natural and secluded area. It does have a nice little island with a man-made bridge, but I don't think that, unfortunately, there's too much encroachment and industrialization for there to, in my mind, for there to be a singular, much less a group of unknown creatures that would exist in an area that's surrounded by city. And I think that the story itself is unique, but it's one that is often really embellished in some way. I think that, depending on who you ask, it was either a Bigfoot type creature or specifically an anthropomorphic goat humanoid, which people call goat man. That's a bit anything. I mean, some people heard of the mythological satyrs of Greek mythology and things like this, but that doesn't make really any practical sense as to there being an existing, goat person type creature. The idea is interesting, but other than that, people often consider that it was a hoax by like some high school pranksters that threw a tire at a bunch of the pottery goers that saw this thing running around up on a bluff. And before that, something had been seen at Lover's Lane. I would love there to be some groundbreaking creature that, rewrites a lot of the biological understanding that we have, whether that is Bigfoot or a goat man or something. I think the more practical and like sensible answer is that's probably misidentification, and probably a mixture of pranks alongside people's excitement. And at the time, people are ready and eager for things to be monsters. At that time, here in the area, they had a hunt. People gathered up and took up arms to go look for something. And so I think things do get blown out of proportion. It would be really interesting. So I think that the story itself has inspired a bit of local urban legend and folklore. And this year, they don't do this very often. It's actually a very limited type of function, but the local nature center that is what the whole area is enclosed within. It's called the Fort Worth Nature Center. They put together an event called the Monster Bash. So that's happening later this year as well. And I would say that despite people believing it or not, or whatever, they have an idea of when it comes to the Lake Worth monster, I would say that it's still a great opportunity to learn about local history, other stories of strange encounters, and get together and, in an attempt to make sense of a historical mystery, but also celebrate that, history is interesting and mysteries are worthwhile to look into. And so, to put it simply, I don't know, but I would say that it probably would fall more into the area of a hoax or misidentification.
Yeah. When we were down there at the Dogman conference that Friday night, we actually were going to go to Lake Worth and kind of just check out the area, but somehow we ended up at the stockyards. Don't know how that happened.
That's because they closed off Lake Worth where we could get in. They closed off the access at dusk, and we weren't even done until then. That's what happened. So we just decided to pick option number 2. We chose option number 2 and did our history and research in the stockyards. Just saying. That's what we did.
The stockyards are historic and also considered somewhat of a haunted attraction as well. So, that works out good too. Plus the Lake Worth monster is shown on a plaque there at the Fort Worth Nature Center, which you can go see. It's about mythological wildlife. It's there all the time. Stockyards is kind of a seasonal thing, so you can always get a chance to come back, and that would be a great opportunity to go and see that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
That's true. Okay, so I do have a big question. This is a big question because there's a lot of people that think otherwise, but I want to know what your opinion is on this. Do you think that these things that we talk about are intertwined or connected somehow, such as Bigfoots and alien and paranormal? Do you think that these things are connected?
That is a really good question, and that was something that I really enjoyed entertaining in my own mind in various ways for like the last decade. And I think it's fascinating to consider what the possibilities are. But I would say after much contemplation and consideration with people I've talked to, material that I've come across, literature, things that appear online, and the historical record, as well as the scientific documentation of what's at least considerable when it comes to anything paranormal. In my mind, it's insufficient. I would say there's not enough that's compelling to me to consider that everything is connected. I think that some things may be by way of proximity understood as in some way being relevant together. But I don't think that there's enough of a consistent data set across the board in all ways to suggest that there's one thing that connects all of this stuff together. And I think that's probably disappointing for a lot of people, because I feel like it's fun to say, yeah, it's all connected, but that's not a scientific, statement. And to me, I'm not a scientist, but I would say that it's really important to also understand that these are scientific endeavors. And I think that it's really important to hear from scientists who are involved with real scientific work, because oftentimes what I found is in studying the community of people involved with these various arenas, whether it's ufology, cryptozoology, the paranormal, there's unfortunately, I'd say a weird disconnect between conventional scientific basis of knowledge and what unfortunately has become like a much more charismatic approach, which is technobabble. So what this means is people just come up with words and terms and put some scientific sounds to it. And I think, unfortunately, it sounds good. People like things to be, interesting, that they'll seek confirmation bias. And unfortunately, I think confirmation bias is rampant in a lot of these. And to me, it's a little bit disappointing, because there are people who I think are considering how do we move forward? How do we move the needle forward when it comes to real scientific investigative work, not simply just, senseless data that only points in the direction of what we want it to, because we're attempting to gather data towards a specific outlook. So to summarize, I think that there are some things that are really weird. I think that there are some strange unknowns that aren't just simple mundane things. But I would say that those are extreme rarities and anomalies. I think that there are some very practical and sensible things happening that people often misinterpret. So I think that there's a lot going on, and I don't think that all Bigfoot and all UFOs and all cryptids are all related. I think that, sometimes people just are not very good witnesses. I think some people suffer from mental conditions that are impairing their discernment, and that's also not a favorable thing for people to hear as well. It would be naive of us to think that everyone's telling, not just that they're not sincere, but they're actually telling something that's an objective aspect of reality, not necessarily that it's subjective to them, but it's being presented as if it's a real concrete part of reality. And I really don't think that that's the case for all of this. I also don't think that all UFOs are the same thing, or that all Bigfoot or all cryptid accounts are the same thing. And I think that it's case by case basis, and it's easy to lump things together. So we want things to be connected. Our brain is wired, it's hardwired to find patterns. It's called apophenia. And we see things, we see shapes, we see patterns. It's also pareidolia. And it makes sense. So our challenge as humans is to try to not always fall into the pattern recognition that suits our desires. And I think that's where it's difficult for us as enthusiasts who are interested in these strange topics to realize maybe some of these things are not connected in any way, and maybe some of them are. But again, I don't think to me, it just seems like there's insufficient data to suggest that altogether it's all connected. And I think that maybe some things are, but it would be, again, case by case basis. And we don't have any definitive factual base of knowledge to work with. There's nothing out there that's suggesting that. And that's where it's a challenge for us, is because everyone's sharing these things, but it's not sometimes being taken seriously. But I think having a supportive network and group of people who you can share helps to destigmatize a lot of these topics in a way that it makes it less difficult to talk about and to share otherwise really challenging things with anybody, friends or family or just strangers. So maybe there's something to it.
And I start to think about that too in what you're saying. And I don't know. I'm not even trying to pretend to know. But there are some data gathering groups out there that have been taking reports on different things. And one group in particular that Krista and I know of, they omitted some things being some things that were happening in some of the reports of Bigfoot. Okay, so if there was an alien sighting with or a UFO sighting or a UAP sighting with a Bigfoot, or there was orbs or anything else that happened around this Bigfoot sighting, that part was being omitted and only the Bigfoot part was being taken. Do you think that maybe that's why we don't have enough evidence, is because people are just kind of like, well, we don't know what that is, and that's just crazy talk, so we're just not going to put that in the report. We're just going to put in the facts. And since we don't know what that is, we'll just leave it sit. Do you think that may be why we don't know, or we don't have enough information?
Well, I'd say we don't know, probably because we don't have anything definitive at all for any of these things, unfortunately, other than what is explainable. So, when someone says, I saw a Bigfoot with a UFO, right there, those two things are already ambiguous. What is Bigfoot even at all, right? It's just a word we use to attempt to describe a creature or something. And a UFO just means an identified object. So to assume that those things are connected, like those two individual phenomenon are connected, is one thing. To suggest that it's all connected is a leap of faith, because by saying that they're all connected, you're saying that a historic UFO report from the 50s is somehow connected to modern Bigfoot reports and vice versa. And it's like that, there's no real reassurance that you can give to anyone who's hard pressed to look at the data in a way to say that makes sense with what we have, other than just saying believe it. And so to me, I don't look at any of this as a faith-based subject. Some people do. I think that people who really look at the data that they collect and they omit things for whatever reason is to suit a particular data set, and whether that's intentional or not is up to the person or individual or organization. So as an example, MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, used to do the same thing. They would take UFO reports, and if someone had something to say about what they refer to as Bigfoot, they would find that sort of irrelevant for a long time and not include that in any way. The challenge with that is that even if the person was sincere and they saw something, let's say a giant hairy humanoid, again, we don't know what that is. I mean, it could have been a person, it could have been an animal, it could have been an unknown creature. But the challenge is that you now have two unknowns with a group that's focusing specifically on unknown aerial phenomena. And I think that's one of the difficult issues, is that people stack mysteries together, attempting to explain the mystery. And I think that this compounds the complexity in a way that doesn't really shed light on the issue at all. It actually just muddies the water altogether. And so, in my view, I'd say that, again, it falls into case by case basis. I think it's really naive to suggest that it's all connected, because you're literally talking about an entire historic subject of reports is somehow connected to very specific reports of something else in all these places. And there's very little to suggest that that's actually the case. I think that people just want it to be the case, and so they say that it's connected because it suits their likeness of what they want to be true. And so I think that it's easy to do that when there's nothing to really definitively say one way or the other. And so I'd say that, I do think it's important that we consider when a case has multiple types of phenomena and people are experiencing whatever they refer to. Again, we use these words to try to describe things that are not defined by hard, rigid sciences. And that's difficult when people don't know what to refer to. So I do think there are things going on. But I think that it's probably not the best in our interest to try to conflate them together for the sake of us wanting them to be connected. Because otherwise, how are they connected other than our, want for them to be, unless we experience something that is specific for that particular situation? I think that that's one of the difficult things, is that it's not something we can just lump together wholeheartedly and say that it works. And when I think that there's insufficient data to really suggest that across the board, in my view.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Josh.
Hey.
Hi, Josh.
And on that note, I'm going to completely disagree with you on that. I love you, Daniel, but I don't look at the view that way at all. I think what we're looking at, I think in some cases that's probably the truth. That's probably what's going on. But I think a lot of times, I always point to this one particular pivotal case, and it was before I started my show. Even me and the guys went out to this place outside of my hometown, and we were there to look for a dog man, because they said, "Oh, there's this." Well, they didn't call it a dog man. They said it was like a werewolf, and it was at the child's window. Mm-hmm. I walk in and a bunch of weird stuff was popping off. And I'm not going to lie. If my brother hadn't been like right behind me, you walk in and it's like, oh crap. Well, you try to turn around and walk out. And I kind of bumped into him and he just kind of pushed me forward, and I was like, dude, I wasn't coming out here to deal with poltergeists or whatever the hell, that was, which we know now that's what you would call it. I mean, but I was just like, this is not, they kind of left out that part. They told me like there was a dog man, or because I had told them it's called a dog man, because we were investigating things, and at that time I was working with a guy named Vic on DER, and so went out there to investigate something that I was told was a werewolf-like creature, which we call a dog man. So on the phone I had been saying, okay, yeah, this sounds like a dog man. They didn't tell me that ninja blenders were flipping up and that washers and dryers were flipping around and the lights were going off and on. I didn't know all that. I knew there was a little bit of stuff. She said, I think maybe our house is haunted. It was like, no, it was beyond that. It went well beyond that. So I think that what happens a lot of times when in these cases is that you know, if you dig a little deeper and you do your diligence, due diligence, as they say, and you look into the phenomena, you more than just scratch the surface, you'll find there's a lot of other stuff happening at the same time. Now, why that is, this is what's interesting, though, and I want to know what Daniel's take is on this. And I know Daniel very well. We've talked lots, and so I want to know, like, I guess what your take would be on a situation like that. Let me just go with that one situation there out in Byersville. Like, what do you think is going on with that, Daniel? Like, you walk in there to talk about to someone about, potentially a dog man, and then it becomes a severe haunting. What do you think that is?
Yeah, no, I do think it's interesting that people have reported these things. And I should make it clear that when I say that there's not enough data, I mean real scientific work that shows anything. And unfortunately, what we do have is a mountain of witness testimony, a mountain of anecdotal accounts that basically share these types of connections between things. But unfortunately, because of how a lot of the things aren't really formally reported or really submitted into any real investigative work that's done. However, I think that it challenges us to really do consider, like you're saying, like, what does that mean when you have different things happening, effects, electromagnetic effects within the vicinity of something that was reported to have happened. Similar things are the case when you look at reports, and a great number of them have, the legendary, the historic J. Allen Hynek pointed out, you have a way that you can scale reports based upon encounter types. What unfortunately is not really the case for some of these other fields, and in some ways there are, but there's no universal system, is how to classify reports, how to classify an encounter of various kinds. And in a simple way, if you have someone that describes a dog-man encounter or a creature of any kind, if you were to relate it to the Hynek scale, which is Close Encounters, most people have probably seen or heard of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Well, that's a part of the Hynek scale. You have the first, second, and third kind, and then subsequently people have added to that the fourth and fifth kind. So the first encounter, or Close Encounters of the First Kind, is an observable. You witness something from a distance. The second would be something is physically affected from a phenomenon. So if you, let's say, witnessed the dog man from a distance and someone just saw it and that was it, that would be a first kind, right? CE1. But if someone maybe was affected by that phenomenon, whatever they might call it, or if it's dog man or whatever, that would be the second kind. But when it comes to something that seems possibly tangential to the initial sighting, like if it's, to put it simply, someone saw a dog man wherever this was, and then upon looking into it, instead of seeing the dog man again, some other issue happened, like you're saying, poltergeist or whatever that is. I would say that what that entails is like a modified version of Close Encounters of the Second Kind, where maybe the person wasn't affected necessarily by the dog man through observable means, but the second situation that's maybe coinciding with that, physical objects being affected by something, there's something there. But I think that they should also be treated not as just an individual situation only, but also looked into as both separate issues, including an overall situation. Just maybe in the same way that one would investigate a crime scene. I think that it's important to see that there are some factors that are relatable, but also we have to look at them as individual components of a bigger picture. And so I think that when people describe something like poltergeist phenomenon, hitchhiker effect phenomenon, phantom entity phenomenon, whether that's an apparition of some sort, where it's a physical object or physical entity or creature, whatever that is, Those are all very interesting. And I think that a lot of the reports that are out there are suggestive of something physical. People see something, they smell something, they see something near a physical object, the vicinity of something in which this is leaving an impression, perhaps prints, other things. So something is suggesting that there's a physical component to these encounters. But if something paraphysical is happening, or what maybe some people say metaphysical, that adds a new component. That makes it challenging. And I think that for the studies that have been done into parapsychology, I think that there is some interesting, considerable, like, Stanley Krippner was a big proponent of parapsychology and attempts to understand how psychic type phenomenon may be really deep rooted in other things, other sciences that are like cemented in our conventional understanding, but it just hasn't been well explored because there aren't a lot of people making data sets of these experiences in a way that's tangible enough for people to go and do real scientific investigative work. What we have are a lot of amateurs out there who are independent. And when I say amateurs, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, it's one thing for MIT to go out and investigate something, or something that is really going to yield results in a real scientific journal. Like, that's going to make progress in a way that unfortunately probably not going to see a lot of. And I think that because of how a lot of people share information when it comes to paranormal phenomena, the quick response is to share it on social media everywhere. And that's probably like the least scientific thing that could help, other than just to put eyes on it. It's causing a lot of situations from that. But to kind of get back to the main idea of what you're positing there, Josh, I think that it is important to consider there are singular phenomenon instances where someone does encounter, they describe encountering a cryptid or an entity encounter, or they see a UFO, right? And that's the only thing that happens. But aside from those, you do have a portion of reports and descriptions of situations where someone's describing multiple types of phenomena. And I think that those are really interesting because they're probably a rarity and anomaly when it comes to trying to be able to acquire data in a tangible way, other than for someone to suggest that I just felt it or I sensed it, right? Because that's not a hard data point that people can use. And you just have to rely on that person's, account. You have to take their word for it. And that's not a scientific method, unfortunately, for us to be able to make demonstrable. So I think that it's important because there is something here going on. And if we don't think that, there's anything to it, all right, people can disregard it. But if there's something really going on, then there has to be a way for us to find a tangible way to allow for it to be explored. And I think that people are doing the best they can with the different gadgets and things they bring on to location to try to take measurements and make things more consistent. But the real challenge is that a lot of the paranormal phenomena is not consistent in a way that lends repeatability. And that's why it's not taken as seriously in scientific institutions and things. So I think that when it comes to people describing these other types of more paranormal types of things, it's very subjective because each person might have a different experience. And that makes it hard to collate those as a data set for someone to analyze scientifically and like in a lab setting. A good example is people often wonder, like, what's going on with Skinwalker Ranch? Why is it that we have this place that's on a network television show that's just going episode after episode, season after season, telling about how there's all this incredible stuff going on, creatures, portals, strange energy, UFOs, people with a lot of money have looked into this place. So is there really something to it, or is it simply made for entertainment, or is it both? I think it could easily be both. We know it for sure is entertainment. Otherwise it wouldn't be a show. Is there really something there worth investigating? Probably so. Is it being embellished for the sake of entertaining TV? Maybe. Aside from all of that, are there cases people aren't seeking fame and wanted to just share what they had happen? Yeah, for sure. And I think that it is puzzling to see that there are things that are related. But I should say that, when I say that I don't think things are connected, I mean that in a very broad, extremely general sense, that not all UFOs are connected to all of Bigfoot reports along with all of Dogman's reports. So yeah, I think it's case by case basis. And I do think that some situations do show that there are some strange relatable things that you can ignore or not. So yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind is people do share about having multiple things go on.
What one of the things I want to say, we were on Texas show last night, and for a little while I was on there, and one of the things that we talked about was legalities. And one of the things that I find interesting, and I love that, Daniel, you're from a UFO background. I love that. I like different people from different backgrounds, and not everybody has to get along or agree. I was also on Red Creek Mafia's show. Mike, forgive me, Mike Wheeler. Red Creek Research. He changed it.
Gotcha.
It's more palatable to say, like, I'm with the mafia. We're talking about UFOs and Bigfoot. No, in Mike, the same thing happened, and Jeff was on there, and if you guys, I've known of Jeff, I don't really know, I didn't know him, I formally met him yesterday, and there was a guy on the chat who kept saying, Dogman's not real, Dogman's not real. For you, it's not real. For me, I don't have a choice. For me, it became very real when I was 15. Now, that being said, if I looked at everything from the scientific lens, like J. Allen Hynek, by the way, though, he's talking about the guy from Project Blue Book, which was a set of analysis that he kind of came up with that said, this is how we're going to approach this, which they had to do because it was government funded. The government said, hey, tell us what's going on. But in my opinion, they were like, but not really. And we're just going to pay you and you come up with a system and we're going to ignore it anyway. It doesn't really matter. We just want to be able to tell everybody that this is crap. Nothing's happening. And I think Hynek figured that out pretty quick. Like that's what they were doing. But the system, it makes sense when, to try to bag and tag is what they say, what is this? What are we dealing with here? And so I was talking about legalities last night and we got into the whole, now, if you're a UFO person, you're going to look at it from a perspective of like the intergalactic treaty that was supposedly signed by our governments of the world. And part of that for our part was that, hey, you can take so many specimens from our planet and humans too. You can take cattle, you can take dogs, sheep, horses, whatever. You can take bears, you can take wolves, you can take whales, doesn't matter. You can take humans, but only in a limited capacity. And so that was supposedly a part of that. So there's this legality here. A lady tried to be snarky with me years ago, and she's like, why, if aliens exist, then why are we not all just being abducted, or why haven't we been invaded? Okay. If reptilians live within the earth, then why have they not come topside and completely devastated our planet? And I said, that's a good question. You got me. That means that none of it exists. Thank you for playing. You totally destroyed my paradigm. I'm going to go home and hang myself. No, that's not what happened. No, what I told her, and she didn't want a real answer. She wanted to be snarky. And so I told her, I said, look, I'm not going to give you the answer that you're looking for, but I'm going to tell you what I think is happening. I think that there's a legality in place that prevents it. She's like, oh, you think that these creatures are all just going to do that because of that? I said, no. I said, do you break the law? She's like, absolutely not. I said, do you break the law? I mean, like, do you speed? She's like, well, of course I speed sometimes, but not with my grandchild. And I said, oh, okay, we're not getting all that. But you break the law. Here in Texas, and Daniel's from Texas, when I get in my truck or SUV or my car, whichever one, and I go and I get in the left lane, I'm looking to seriously break the law. Like if I get in my Dodge Charger, I'm going to break the law. Okay, we're talking 110. All right, I'm joking. It's not really an exaggeration, but for my wife's sake, yes. If I'm in my truck and I'm in a hurry to get to a job site, probably going to break the law. But do I go out and sell bales of cocaine? No, because there's a legality in place. And when you get popped with something like that, you're in big trouble. Now, demons, and I'm going to make this all come together here. Demons have the same set of laws. Why or how, I cannot tell you why it is so closely related to this other legality of the intergalactic oneness treaty, whatever. The same thing happened. I was at a conference not too long ago. And in fact, Daniel, you were at the same conference and you were speaking. And so I was approached by someone and I was flattered. They actually wanted to interview me. And I was standing there with Chris James. I didn't even know that this person knew who the hell I was. and they were some younger people, and they were like, Mr. Turner, can we get an interview with you? Can you please show us? I said, show you some skin, and I lifted up my shirt, and they were like, oh my God, and they fell backwards and they ran out. I'm just kidding, I'm joking. And then totally, the mall security came throwing me out, and Daniel had to come and rescue me. It was the whole thing. Daniel said he will not drink any more Pabst Blue Ribbon the rest of the night, and I didn't. For my own credit, I did not do it. It was a whole thing. Him and Ken saved me from utter disaster. So we were sitting there, and now I talked to these kids. They were like high school kids or whatever, and Chris James there, and they actually wanted to interview me for their school paper, which I thought was cool. So I was like, okay. So I gave them a little interview, whatever. There was this lady listening, and she comes from her booth over there, and she's like, look, I'm just going to be kind of nosy. She was very nice. But she goes, I hear that you were a paranormal investigator. I said, no, not really. I cover the paranormal. And she goes, oh, okay, because this is like, so it's not like UFOs. I said, yeah, it is. It's like all of it, everything. It's a Fordian show. We talk about it all. And she goes, oh, really? I said, because I think it's all connected. Mm-hmm. And so then we got into a deep discussion, philosophical, about religion, things like that. And I told her, I said, the reason that she asked that question, which has been asked to me multiple times. Heck, in fact, it was asked to me a few days ago through email. And it's asked all the time. 4 or 5 days ago, somebody asked us, why are we not all being possessed?
Right.
And I told them very, very simple. Because there is a legality in place. Because if a demon does that, okay, just like an alien or whatever, if they get caught doing whatever it is that they're not really supposed to be doing, yeah, there may be ramifications, maybe not. It depends. But it depends also on the severity, right? So there is a legality that's in place that we don't really totally understand, but we know it exists because I know that from talking to people who have performed exorcisms. I've talked to people who've regressed alien abduction witnesses, and there is sort of a parameter there that if they violate that or they go outside of those parameters, they could be in big trouble. Just like you and I, Daniel, if you're smoking the reefer bud and you get approached by a man in uniform, you have to eat it. Now, not anymore, not so much anymore. You used to. You get pulled over, you're like, oh, crap, and you're throwing, at least I did back in the day, I'm going to be honest. And hey, man, it works, man. It really works. So I was just about to light up a spliff one time, and I got pulled over right outside of Georgetown. Now, that is like big time trouble. And this cop walking up, he got out and like adjusted his belt, like I'm about to screw this guy back. He had that kind of attitude. And I said, damn it. I don't want him digging through my stuff because I know he's going to put the gloves on. He's going to do it to Williamson County. So I ate a penner. Okay. So what? You did it. I'll go on record and say I did that. Who cares? I got away with it. He's like, your car smells like marijuana. I said, I have no idea why. I let my nephew use it. And he's such a shithead, and he's just like, well, go ahead and step out. By the time we were done, we were talking and laughing. I didn't get too close because my breath smelled like some freaking serious dank, And so I just was like, and I started feeling it too. But, you'll go out of your way to not get in trouble, to not have those legalities. You punch someone down on 6th Street and you're like, they were on the ground when I got here, sir. I don't know why he's laying on the ground acting like that. But that's what happens. These beings, they possess somebody. When someone, in the name of Christ casts them out, well, guess what, dude? They get in trouble because you did something you were not supposed to be doing, because if they had free reign upon us without any sort of like legality, we'd all be possessed. We'd all be on the chopping block. We'd all be in a UFO being, whatever. Now, why on God's beautiful green marble earth here do we have people that are being abducted that are talking about this same sort of parameter as we do the people who are getting possessed? I say that it's on the same level, and I say that there's something to it. I say that we are probably dealing with a type of legality. What that has to do with what Daniel and I are talking about is that legality is on the same terms. It's like demonic terms, angelic terms, and then it's on the, intergalactic UFO. I mean, me and Christopher Jordan have talked about this, and Dan, we've talked so many times. We probably talked about it before, but this has come up again and again. So when you're dealing with this type of legality, that tells me that there is some sort of oneness to this whole thing. Just like when people say that they have had a mind speak. Now, there again, that's all subjective. You don't know what the person is doing or why it's happening, but you do get a type of mind speak that comes from witnesses, whether it's Bigfoot or Dogman, and they are surprised that these what appear to be super predators are not eating them. They're not attacking them. And this one lady, she was up in Washington and she was chased by a Bigfoot, not really aggressively though. I mean, she was just like kind of chased out of an area. And I told her a story that I'd gotten from a guy years ago who was a meter reader for a gas company and what happened to him. And his story was pretty horrific. He got away. But, I said, there's always that chance that, somebody doesn't, And I said, is it the luck of the draw? Or did these things just let you go because there is, like I said, there's something there that's connected that tells them right now you cannot do this. Now, I've had people tell me that they've been told that not right now, not yet, alluding to the time that there's a time when they will be able to do this to us and that they will come for us and they will do this. And this has happened more and more and more. I'm getting these stories. Now, I'm not getting them every week. I'm not even getting them every month. But every couple months or so, you get a story. Yeah, me and Anthony were just listening to a lady the other day, and she was talking about how this thing was saying, we're going to come for you, but not right now. And the first thing she did was make sure she had her heart right with God, which gave her some solace. Now, the average scientific-minded person is going to say, well, if that is true, they don't believe that God's going to protect her one way or the other, but it made her feel better about the situation. She felt a calm over herself and she dreamed that everything was fine, but that she wasn't going to be taken and done things to, killed, whatever. And I think that is a part of it. I think that is part of this whole thing. It's helped shape my view over the years of what we're dealing with and telling people, look, this is just what I believe. I'm not saying this is the absolute truth. And I don't go on my show and go, this is the absolute word, because you don't know, But I can tell you this, there has to be some sort of connection because this stuff keeps coming up over and over and over again. And I think that if you're from a certain field, and I like that other people have differing opinions, or we're living in an echo chamber and you're not going to get anywhere, because then that means we're just talking about something we've already all figured out, right? So with Daniel's point, very scientific, he's saying, hey, this is where I believe the data is. It's saying that, that it's not connected. Now, there could be, and this is the last thing I'm going to say about this, there could be something that is drawing these other phenomena together where they usually don't belong together. Mm-hmm. Power plants have a high level of UFO activity. In and around power plants, they seem to kind of swoop around. And I've studied this from the Rockdale power plant where my dad used to work out at Alcoa. And since it's closed, I've interviewed about 40 people probably from out there. Not all of them has an amazing story, but they do have some stories. And one led to another. I'd be like, this guy I worked with, he can tell you he worked in the smelting plant. Oh, this guy, he was an electrician out there. Talk to this guy, talk to that guy, and blah, blah, blah. And then out in LaGrange, there's still an active power plant, and you will get Dogman, Bigfoot, and UFO, and people will even see spirits. So is it the power plant? I mean, so yeah, that right there tells me that there could be something that makes this stuff connect. So does that make sense? Does that?
Yeah, well, it seems like if there's an order to any of these many different things going on, it's very clandestine to the common person. It's not made clear to the public as to what the order really is, other than through the few people who have these types of experiences to interpret it in that kind of way. And I think that's where it's challenging for most people who don't experience these things on any kind of regular basis, and maybe and in some way when they're challenged with it, it's so far out of their own worldview or something that it's difficult for them to incorporate in a way that makes sense. So it's easier to just to filter out or ignore. And if there's anything to a sense of order with, different types of phenomena having a greater aspect of reality management than we as humans have. I think that that's something that would be difficult for us to know in a very common way as well, with a direct, very open intervening taking place that's not clandestine. Because what seems to really be happening is, for anyone who describes any of these things, it's almost as if it wasn't meant to be noticed in a large capacity. It's maybe very singular, very subjective, which is odd because people maybe interpret things differently than if there is a group of people who witness some phenomenon and describe it all differently amongst each other. So it makes me wonder if there's an order to all of these things, and we can see how there's some connection between them. And if this is taking place, then there seems to be some. If this is all like that, then there would be some kind of administrative role of these agents, or in some way of advanced agency, that they have a greater aspect of reality management than we are currently aware of. And however they act upon that, we would interpret in various ways depending on our own cultural relevance. If we saw the same thing we saw now 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, we might interpret it differently, even if it was the same thing occurring. So it's hard to really say. People often cite this idea of a treaty between President Eisenhower and the Greys. And I, looking into this, I haven't found any real definitive source of this story that's like credible. And unfortunately, it's deep seated in the lore of ufology, and a lot of people rely upon the idea of a treaty to insinuate how to justify abductions. And I think that that's really difficult, knowing that there's not a definitive historical record of this. I've met with and have talked with Laura Eisenhower, who is the great granddaughter of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and she believes all of it. And I think that's really interesting. But despite being related and having otherwise no direct knowledge of this supposed meeting, it would be incredible to think that this actually did take place. But unfortunately, it's not like in the history books, And so whenever, if it did, and maybe it did, if it did at all, it's unfortunate that it isn't known in a way that's not just a conspiracy in the shadowy sense. And people often, this idea of conspiracy having a negative connotation is a much more recent thing, because to conspire simply means two or more parties meeting with an agenda, and so to conspire, or a conspiracy itself, isn't a negative thing. But this idea of a United States president conspiring with non-human intelligence is like world news. It's like that should have been something that set a new standard of awareness for society when that happened. And unfortunately, if it did, it wasn't made public. That's where we're finding there's a difficult sense to try to make out of some of these stories, is because with historical definitive documentation, we're left with hearsay. And for some people, that's okay. And other people, they throw it out the window because it's not traceable to an incredible source. So I think that when you see phenomenon taking place, and if you are interpreting it like Josh is saying, in a way that makes sense in a grand order and scheme of things, then that might be suggestive of there being an agenda. And I know we were just on the show earlier last week, and we talked about how this has been considered by a lot of people. And so I'll just give a shout out to my buddy Jim Mars. He wrote a book back in the 90s called Alien Agenda, where he was considering the possibility of not only are they here, but okay, if we can get over this idea, if are they here, where do we go after that? What is their purpose, their agenda? What do we do about it? And so that's kind of where I think some will consider, what sense do we make? If this is all real, how do we allow it to affect us in a way that is practical in our lives? And what do we do about it? And so, I think there are some things we have to consider, regardless if we have data, scientific evidence that helps us to kind of show, a really definitive thing or not. People will still be affected by stories either way, whether they're real or not. And that's where I think the real challenge comes, is that people are more affected by Hollywood and science fiction and stuff like that. and imaginative things a lot of times. And I'm not talking about any just paranormal stuff or anything like this, but simply society in general is almost more affected by things that aren't real than what is real. And that's sort of the society we live in. And we just have to be careful to see that sometimes it doesn't matter the legitimacy of the story or whatever it is. People are affected by it either way. We're emotional people. We respond and react to different situations depending on where we are with our emotions, our mental state, and all of that. So we just have to see, how do we help in society to, have a better understanding, and in some way how to kind of hold it together without there being just like civil unrest and the world just kind of going into chaos, if in the event an announcement is made that definitively declares, like, across the board, yes, this so and so is real, or this is real, because they don't want things to be just completely chaotic. I mean, I think that would be something no one really wants, but it's helpful to see that, with a lot of the things that are shared about in the circles and communities of people who are interested in the fringe topics as looked at by most normal people, I think that it's important to consider that, it's hard because people who live day-to-day lives they usually don't have the capacity to take on more that makes them think more about, like, wow, that's really interesting. But now it's like, wow, I'm challenged mentally and emotionally to have to, like, incorporate this into my life to see how I move forward. So I think there's a lot there for the common person to try to weigh in, knowing that, wow, there's a whole control system that governs my life and I can't do anything about it. I guess it's just time to, go back to work or something, So it's kind of a mixed bag, but, there's a lot to it, and people have considered how this works in a lot of ways. Jacques Vallée is a proponent of that, and he was one of the people who I think helped bridge the gap between, nuts and bolts ufologists to consider the reality that maybe there's something more going on that does connect this together through a control mechanism, a control system. And I tend to think more along the lines that if there is something, that there would be some kind of reality management system and protocols in place that are upheld by moderators and administrators, just like we have in government. And maybe it's a continuation of our government, but I admittedly that's highly speculative and conspiratorial. But a lot of that I think comes from just studying under my buddy Jim, and I think that it's worth considering and entertaining the possibilities.
Yeah. Interesting. You have a few questions. Do you mind answering a couple of them?
Yeah, go for it. Sure.
Okay. The first one, Paranormal Paul asked, what do you think of the possibility of UFO bases underwater?
Well, one of the things that's really made the rounds lately in the last few years is this idea of transmedium craft or transmedium phenomena. So one of the reasons that when it comes to like official nomenclature regarding UFOs being referred to as UAP, it was at first acknowledged to be unidentified aerial phenomena. Then when a lot of the reports collated by both the Navy and other intelligence community departments and just various agencies found that there are a number of reports that aren't simply aerial objects, but also USOs, underwater submersible objects, things like that. So they changed the A from standing for aerial to anomalous. So now UAP, in the context of government documentation, UAP stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena. And that could be anything. That's kind of a really ambiguous issue, which is like, we're no longer doing with, again, this is in the context of what the United States government and Congress is referring to in their documentation. When they say UAP, they're referring to unidentified anomalous phenomena, which is non-descriptive. It literally could be anything. So that's a difficult thing. But to come back to it, it sounds like from the reports that are coming in from the probably most resourceful military in the world, with the best technology, that there is some validity to this idea of unknown underwater objects. Where they're coming from, there's some estimations as to maybe there's a lot of areas under the water that we just can't get to. So possibly there could be an enormous structure or something, So I think that sure, it would make sense that if there are objects that are coming from somewhere, it would easily be undetectable, deeply hiding under the ocean. But people, and there's a lot of non-military uh, work that's been done to try to map the ocean floor that in doing so have found very strange markings, machine-like trackways at the very bottom of the ocean. Strange things that make us wonder, how did that happen? What made that? Is this a sign of manufacturing? So it seems like I would be hopeful that with all the billionaires and bureaucrats that we have, regardless of whatever people's political or whatever ideology, I would be hopeful that with all of those resources, that someone has done something, hopefully not nefarious, but unbeknownst to most of the populace of the world, that they'd be able to get down or around into places that most people don't have the the accessibility for, like going to space or going into the ocean, and maybe are doing something completely unknown to the majority of the world. It would be astounding to think that that's not happening, that people not like Elon Musk, who's at the stage of the world showing everyone what he's doing for the most part, other than what we don't know what he's doing. People that, let's say, all the not Elon Musks who are just maybe not as wealthy as him, but like who have an enormous amount of wealth, who are not on the world stage, who are doing things in the dark. I would like to think that some of those resources have been utilized for something that would seem, like an incredible plot to a science fiction movie. And, people also wonder why the Pentagon has a deficit of trillions of dollars. I mean, if you made $1 like every second, you'd have, after, what is it, like 12 days, you'd have $1 million, but you wouldn't have $1 billion until like several years. So for there to be trillions of dollars missing, that's a lot of money. And money isn't everything, obviously, but like with that type of capital, I mean, we're talking like the best instruments in the world don't even use trillions of dollars, So what's really being used with what is possible? And, so the idea of there being underwater installations, I would hope that there are some well-off people, humans, much less aliens or, crypto-terrestrials, as the late Mac Tonys would write about. And I would think that there has to be someone out there who's not even just conceptualized this, but started to get to work on a real sea lab or something to that effect. And so, even the most practical way, whether it's like non-human or whatever, there ought to be at least a group of people, the 1% or lessers, out there who are doing this. I mean, I think that there has to be someone out there who's got the ability to. So I don't know that accounts for all of them. I mean, sure, I think that there's probably a great deal of things that we'll discover along the way in the ocean before we ever find anything in space. It's our backyard, and so I think that there is something to the USOs.
Yeah, I do too. Next question. This is a good one. I'm curious your thoughts on this. Mr. Jones, do you have interviews with UFO abductees? William asks.
Yeah, I would say that the most notable people that I've interviewed personally, and many of these are on my YouTube channel, The Vortex, is where I share all the media that I do. I would say that the most notable people who describe having an abduction experience or being taken against their will would be Terry Lovelace, who wrote a book called Devil's Den.
Yep.
He had an experience in 1977 where he described seeing an enormous triangular object. He was taken, radiated, or experienced radiation poisoning. Very interesting situation. A few years earlier, 73, I interviewed a man named Calvin Parker. He's pretty well known in the community of ufology for having been one of two people who was part of the Pascagoula, Mississippi UFO incident, where he and Charles Hickson were taken aboard an object, to their recollection, with strange claw-handed beings, like robots, that took them aboard and did some weird experiments with them in Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1973. I've talked with Kathleen Martin, who's the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, who in 1961, I think in New Hampshire, had described an experience of being abducted and taken by gray entities. These grays were something that really kind of hit the forefront at that time frame. And, while Kathleen Martin, while she's not exactly directly related to the incident itself, she speaks sort of on behalf of having been related and also a member of MUFON and MUFON's experiencer research and resource team. And so I think that's notable. But also I'd say that the probably most notable, and there's a number of other people, I would say that, most people would probably know who I'll just share is probably the most well-known is Travis Walton. I've met with and talked with Travis Walton multiple times over the years, and he's very sincere. And I think that can go a long way with people. When someone's charismatic or sincere, people usually tend to find them more believable. He did take a polygraph test, and his account has been shown in the movie Fire in the Sky. A lot of people remember that from the 80s. And he was basically struck with, as he recounts, struck with a beam of light in the Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona in 1975. And he was with his crew of loggers and ran out of the truck to go look at what they called a fire, basically a fire in the sky. It turned out to be a UFO to their recollection, and he spontaneously and a bit impulsively ran up to it, and it struck him, and his coworkers drove off, and they eventually mustered up the courage to come back and try to see what happened, and they all say he was gone. They went to go to the sheriffs and told them about it, and they were all considered part of a homicide case until Travis reemerged. Now, I'll just say this. Those are all probably the most notable cases, and I'll be the first to say I don't know if any of them are legitimate. I think they sound interesting. They're very sincere. There's some physical consideration to what can be examined now after all these years. I mean, we're talking, these are cases 50 years ago, so it's not something that, unfortunately Calvin Parker passed away, so we don't have Calvin or Charles now. Terry Lovelace is still around, but he's kind of one of the only people that you can talk to about his case. Travis has been holding down his same story for the most part for years. The movie isn't exactly what he describes, but Travis is an interesting guy. He sounds very sincere, but even after all the time I've been with him, I would say I don't know if he's telling the truth or not. I'd like to think that what's incredible, and I'll just say this, what's incredible about his story is that he would probably look at it in a way that he basically says he feels like they killed him on accident, like he died, and they brought him back to life, which is curious because if that actually happened, it makes you wonder why did they do that? What was their motive for doing something which otherwise it wasn't an abduction in the traditional sense of him being taken against his will. He ran out. So he thinks of it more as like an ambulance call. Like they realized, oh, this human came in close proximity and didn't know that this was going to happen. So we'll fix him up and he'll be on his way. That's kind of how he says what happened. So, that whole story is really just intriguing because if it all happened, a lot of people find him to be very sincere and telling the truth. I don't know either way, but I would say just based upon the polygraph tests, there's something happened. Some people say they call it the Heber hoax and that it all was made up and they just wanted to cash in on a prize, and that did happen.
Right.
You can look into it. There was a reward that they were trying to go after. Later on, were offered a different reward and telling that it was all a hoax, and they didn't go for that. But anyway, my point is that with people that come forward, they sometimes, we don't know about all the other Travis Waltons that never shared their story. We're thankful maybe because of those who have come forward, who felt confident enough that their story is important for people to hear, that we have a lot to go by. Otherwise, without witness testimony, it's really not much to work with. So those are just notable names. A lot of other people I've talked to have experiences that, they don't want their story shared publicly. They don't mind saying, hey, I know you're into this, so I'll tell you. But those are some of the people that I've talked to who are willing to say, hey, this is what I can share my story. And so, yeah, I do think there should be a clear indication that not all alien encounters are related directly to UFO encounters.
Right.
And that sometimes, while people do experience entities within the proximity of UFO, that's not always the case. And so some people experience what they call aliens without a UFO at all. And so whether they're aliens or not, even just on the basis for alien is foreign, just means different. So, whether they're from this world or another world, we don't know definitively unless they're being told that by the entities themselves. And even then, is it the truth or not? So I do think it's interesting to hear about testimony when it comes to entity encounters, and not just encounters, but abductions. That's a CE4. Close encounters of the fourth kind is an abduction scenario. So it does seem like there are a lot of collections of reports that suggest that something's going on. I don't think that it could all be chalked up to psychosis or trauma, but at the same time, unfortunately there are individuals that, due to emotional and mental trauma, mask situations with something that is actually different than what happened. And maybe at the same time, there are situations that did actually happen that are given screened memories in the opposite manner, which are seeming to be much more mundane. So while there are people who, unfortunately, like rape victims, who masked their rape trauma with an alien abduction, I don't think that accounts for all of the abduction cases, but it does for some of them. And I think that at the same time, if there are genuine alien abduction scenarios, or some non-human intelligence taking people at their will or not, I mean, we look at what we do to livestock and ranching as a form of agriculture in life here in Texas. It's the norm. What we do to livestock should be no different than what any other form of intelligence could be able to do to us. And why we would be surprised about that is still interesting to me. But I do think that there are a number of things going on. I don't think it's all the same thing. But Josh pointed out earlier that if there's an idea of some kind of agreement of legalities or whatever it is, maybe that could give us a sense of why some things happen, why some people are sought after than others. If there's a rogue agenda at play, if things are being done in a way that's against some kind of protocol. I mean, at the very basic level, people who are interested in science fiction might recall Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek had the Prime Directive, which was a non-intervention policy. So if there's any reality to that within the realm of these others, and if this is all going on as people are describing, then that law is being broken, if that's really happening. So yeah, I think that there are some things going on. I would say, if you want to check out some of the people I've talked to just to get an idea, some of the more notable names, you can check out the ones I mentioned earlier: Calvin Parker, Terry Lovelace, Travis Walton, Kathleen Martin's a big supporter or of offering support. But I'll say this, on the other hand, I've interviewed people like Mary Rodwell and others, Ray Hernandez, who are part of the Consciousness Contact Research Institute, and who are also part of an organization called FREE. There's an Apollo astronaut named Dr. Edgar Mitchell. He started a lot of things. One of them was an organization called IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, as well as a group called FREE, Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. The FREE study was a medical study done on about 4,000 people who described having entity encounters. And the FREE study, which is a statistical study, it's published, showed that the majority of those people described that all of them had positive experiences. So, their angle, based upon the statistics that they gathered, is that abductions and the negative sense and negative aliens and these types of things are not the case, according to the FREE study. And so there's a lot of contending viewpoints. So my interest is that in studying the variety of outlooks, along with the cases of phenomenon types themselves, is that there's no overall consensus. Some people suggest that they're evil, they're demonic. Some people say that there's no negativity at all, and that they're overwhelmingly positive. So it's you can't have one or the other. What we're having is a subjective type of issue where a lot of these things are interpreted based upon the individual. And that's why it makes it difficult to kind of blanket statement the whole thing one way or the other.
Right. Let's real quick go back to Betty and Barney Hill. Did you hear about where, like, her dress, they have her dress and it's at the Smithsonian, but they did testing on it, so they backed this, I feel like, with science, because it had, where she said that she was probed at on I believe it was her stomach area, and everything lined up to what she said, and then that was tested, and then it was her DNA on there. What have you heard about that, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say this. I don't know, but from what I have heard, those tests actually debunked her story, unfortunately. So, and she's Kathleen goes in as a proponent of that the blood was the situation, and she still holds that up. That's what she says. But what a lot of the other critics of the whole case who look at it with that information being examined, the blood analysis came back being unrelated. And so, whether that's written off, whether that's a way to just debunk the whole thing, that's what was made up of that study, was that it showed that it was unrelated and it didn't have anything to do with what she was describing. So whether that's the case or not, I don't know. I'd like to think that where there are probably any number of people who describe these types of situations, they were some of the few people who decided that we're going to go forward with this. They're in a time frame which is very difficult, in a way that is kind of on the cutting edge of when the flying saucer age was relevant, and so this was still a bit on the fringe, even then. And so I think that not only was the flying saucer craze at the time kind of interesting, but then people talking about entity encounters and the grays and all that, it added a new component to ufology. And so people who were investigating, like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and the fictional show on the History Channel, Project Blue Book, did an episode about Betty and Barney Hill under different names. And it's a fun, entertaining show and episode. It's not historically sound at all, really, but it's something that gives you a glimpse of how things could have been. But I would say that along with the whole regression, critical of clinical hypnotherapy, because of the idea of planting in thoughts to the so-called experiencers' point of view. And so that, fortunately, I think does happen. Whether it happened or not, Betty and Barney Hill, I don't know. But, where are things to be tested? I do like about that situation is that, hey, at least she said, I have a stain of blood to show. Mm-hmm. I mean, not everyone's doing that. People just say, believe me, take my word for it. And sometimes that's all you can do, unfortunately. But if you have something, let's go with it, because at least we can, the real scientists are going to say, you know what, whether I believe you or not, doesn't matter. My job, it's incumbent upon me as a scientist to look into your claims. That's how, real science should work. And there are people who are willing to do that. So I think that from what I've looked into, the whole blood stain situation is not holding up. But maybe there's more to it. Maybe that's not the case. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know the results. But it sounds like from what happened is that actually kind of debunked the whole blood part having been relevant.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. There's another one here that I like, this question. Well, Wendy asked, Daniel, what does science say about verifiable out-of-body observations?
Yeah, I mean, science is not a unified body. There's no one overarching kind of like person or group that says this is science. Science is a process. Scientists have opinions. Scientists can be territorial. I would say that, people consider the Monroe Institute as probably the premier group that has focused on out-of-body experiences in a scientific way. There are others. A lot of people don't really know I guess, where to go to look for this type of information. But even programs in the CIA and the Army had remote viewing. So sometimes this gets kind of mixed up with out-of-body experiences. But one of the things that people attempt to utilize is the gateway process and attempting to leave the body through a meditative type of function that allows you to travel remotely in a sense that you can gain insight into a targeted area. This is called controlled remote viewing. And so I would say that there are studies that have been done. There are some studies that have been done that show it's inconclusive. There are some studies that show it's real. Again, it depends on who you ask and where you go. If you look at the Monroe Institute, they're all for it. They that's what their kind of like basis is for working into these scientific directions, is trying to build a data set to help corroborate the claims of numerous people who share about using remote viewing. But also at the same time, one of the really interesting situations going on right now is with the Imperial College in London with a program called DMTX. And just in a nutshell, DMT is dimethyltryptamine. It's a chemical compound that is supposedly secreted in the brain and the pineal gland, but is also definitely found within most all organic life, plants, animals. We know that for a fact. So DMT is sometimes procured and utilized as a controlled substance in order to induce an out-of-body experience. Some people refer to this in different ways. Magic mushrooms, these things, mycelium, that's a form of DMT. This is something that a lot of people don't realize, is that DMT is not a singular, compound that is just one thing. There are many different forms of it, and people have procured it for years. It's something that's been practiced by shamans in the Amazon for centuries, and I think that with the modern outlook on it, it's become a little bit more recreational. But one of the things that we found is that because of how a lot of the things that have been respectfully looked at in a way that's like attempting to make sense of this with real honor to the lineage in which it comes from, they found that these effects are things that have been shared about for years. And so trying to put that pen to paper with making sense of oral traditions and accounts that span back years is not something that always is looked at in a scientific way. So if you take all of that information and you look at what's happening now, something like the Imperial College at London, allowing for there to be a study where supplementing DMT intravenously to patients or people, clients, whoever, who are attempting to what they describe as mapping out the DMT realm and entities. That's incredible to consider that there's a real study like this being done in a legitimate accredited university. Again, whether the study yields results that suggest that there are, direct avenues towards experiencing out-of-body experiences, or if there's something that's showing that these are spontaneous, I would say that, a lot of the work that's being done is not one thing. So whether it's remote viewing, whether it's people looking into how to astral project, whether it's things that are inducing psychedelic experience through altered states of consciousness. I mean, there's immense work that's been done in all of these areas, and they all kind of overlap with the sort of umbrella term of out of body. So yeah, I would say that those are a good place to start. Monroe Institute to get an idea about work that's being attempted, and then the Imperial College in London's program DMTX for people who are willing to go under what they call extended journeys. Because if you just freebase DMT, and I admittedly I've done DMT a number of times. I do consider myself somewhat of a psychonaut. It's fascinating to me to explore the realms of consciousness, and I think that in my own experience, having had an ayahuasca ceremony, it was life-changing. And in my own words, I would say it's not scientific because I wasn't able to quantify it at all. So that's where our challenge lies, is like, where do we really find how this is something objective rather than subjective? Because I could share with whoever about what I had happen, and it might sound interesting, but really it's personal to me. Was it all in my own mind? Maybe, I don't know. But I would say that if the impression that I got from that was what mattered. How I took those things and anchored them into my real life is what mattered. So I would just say that there are real studies being done on what otherwise people consider to be, just, believe or something.
I wanted to say something, jump in here, and there's another institute that you can look to, and it's the Max Planck Institute. And I'm not talking about the Max Planck Institute itself, but there's an offshoot of it, of the Max Planck Institute, and it's the Max Planck Institute of Quantum Optics. And what they understand, what they look into is the attosecond. Now, I don't know if people understand what that is. Attosecond physics, to make everything more quantifiable and make it faster. You know, what they do is they look into ways to make the computer faster. And what they're doing is they're working with another company who I bought stock in because I believe that this is the way of the future. Whether you want it to be or not, it really doesn't matter. It's irrelevant what I think, what Christy, Brandy, or Daniel think. It's what is, right? And so they're using it to do things like make better, mechanics for people who have problems with their, like they have a stroke or a heart attack or whatever. And they do all these different things. But it's also being used for weapons, things like how can we make a rate of fire faster and do all these other things, and what can we do to be. And when they start talking about weapons, they always use it in the form, well, we want to save lives. So that's why we use the squad automatic weapon now, so we can save lives. The military literally said that. Squad automatic weapon being the SAW. A lot of people think it stands for semi-automatic weapon. That is incorrect. It's actually a squad automatic weapon. It's the MG249, I believe what it's called. It's based on a Belgian gun, the FN Minimi or whatever it's called. How you pronounce it? But that's basically, what they did. They said, oh, we're doing all this to save lives. Well, obviously it's going to get into the hands of whoever's nefarious and doesn't give a crap. And they're going to put something into their eyes so they can see through your soul and whatever the hell else they're going to do. To touch on what you said, though, Daniel, about taking hallucinogens, that's what people would call them, but that's, to me, sort of a derogatory term because that's basically saying that you're hallucinating. Now, I've taken pretty much everything but proper DMT. I have taken the button, which is peyote. I have taken LSD multiple times. I'm not going to lie to you. And I've even crossed them over. Controlled violence is exactly what that is. But they did need that, though, for the squad because, the M16A2 was just not getting it done. So they needed something with a little more firepower. And so they came up with that. That's why they did that. But they'll tell you all kinds of reasons why they do what they do, how messed up it is. But to touch on what Daniel said, though, a few things here. The UAP, they make these terms like very ambiguous. You could say it's unidentified aerial phenomena. You could say it's unidentified alien phenomena, unidentified anomalous phenomena, or you could say it's unidentified alien presence, which I like to use as that term, or it's unidentified aerial presence or unidentified anomalous presence, whatever. Because if you stop and you really think about it, that is another form of soft disclosure. They're basically saying, we're going to call it this. It's up to you to read into what we're doing so we can skirt the legalities and kill you. That's what it is every time. And I really believe that. Now, this is going to be a little something different. Me and Daniel at the conference when we were in Mineola. No, was it Mineola? No, Dan, you were there too. But no, it was at Jefferson. At Jefferson, we were outside and we were talking some about tripping. Now, tripping, and I'm sure Breezy, he's in the comment section. He'll tell you what that is. Now, Daniel and I went over a couple of different scenarios that we had, one of which I believe is very Gnostic in itself. Now, here's what I did, and I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound crazy, but who cares? Everybody thinks I'm crazy anyway, right? Crazy like a fox. Anyway, what happens is, what do you think a guy that opens bottles with an army man, right? So I'm going to say this. I had a very serious trip. Now, what I did was I crossed over two different things, and I put myself in a deprivation chamber. Now, basically a padded walls with, and I had a friend who had a studio. His name is Ronan. He's a good friend of mine years and years ago. And he gave me some things and I took some things and I went in there with no sense. There was no sense of touch. I could reach out and touch nothing but the floor, right? I literally, he had a bath, like it was like a kiddie pool with like salt water. So it was like one of those flotation, we had been reading about them 20 years ago. They weren't popular where you can go now and you can do these, right? And people I hear do actually take mushrooms and things like that. And they do this deprivation chamber. But this was 20 something years ago, right? And so I got in there And I was completely devoid of any sound, any light, anything other than just floating on this floor with the water, the floor below me. I could feel it. So you weren't completely devoid of whatever. And I was in there for what felt like days. And I'm talking like a week passed. And it was, I had built an entire world in my own mind. It was like I was making and creating and everything because there was nothing. I was completely alone and ostracized from all of civilization. And so there was no sound, there was nothing. And you start to hear the sound of your own heartbeat, and it starts to make you crazy. And so I started to develop hallucinations, which were completely within my own mind. Now, the wild card being that something could be there spiritually that could be manifesting and messing with you. So you have to keep that in mind, right?
Right.
And somebody said in the chat, and I want to respond to this. They said, if you're taking drugs to get to this, to achieve this state, you're not doing it right. I don't believe that. I believe it's kind of like if you to take a sports term, right? If you're the Astros or the Cowboys, if you win your division, and you gals are Chiefs fans, unfortunately, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Right.
So if you win your division, you got a better shot in the playoffs of getting to the big show, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's other ways to get there. Like the Raiders, they ran the table one year by going in as a wild card, and it's one of my favorite teams, and they swept everybody and destroyed. I think it was the Eagles in the Super Bowl that year. And nobody expected that. They were just like, damn, they were a road team and they just whipped everyone's ass. The Giants did it back in 2007. They beat the Cowboys. Then they beat the Packers. First, they beat the Bucks. I didn't think they were going to get out of Tampa Bay. Then the Cowboys and the Packers. And then they won the Super Bowl against Brady. So there are alternate ways to get from point A to point B. This is just a quicker, whatever. You don't have to go out there and fast and wrap yourself in a blanket and sit out in the baking sun or whatever and go and be dehydrated to achieve it. It just pop a thing in your mouth, right? Yeah. And so really, that's what it is. So they're like, oh, if you're doing that, but some people do have the ability to actually just come out of their body and go into an alternate state, which seems to be more real than this was. One of the things I learned though through this deprivation, which I will never forget as long as I live, is that when the Gnostics talk about God, what they say was that he thought that he was all alone, that he was completely alone, but that there was a mother and a father, and that he had been separated from them. That's kind of their theory, right, of God. I'm telling you, this is the Gnostic belief. In a nutshell, what they say was he became kind of isolated. So him thinking that he was the only being in the universe, he created a world. And that world is our world. Not necessarily just the earth, but the entire cosmos was created by his thoughts, and that this is his waking dream. And that this is, and they also say that the God that we know that's from the lower heaven, whatever, he's actually, they say, the Gnostics, that he was sort of cruel and ignorant because he's not really fully aware. And his mother, and the true living God that resides above the seventh heaven, which would be in the eighth level, that we don't really know. People say there's 10 heavens, but we don't really know what goes beyond. But that would make sense. The string theory can kind of say there's these many different dimensions, right? So what if that God that they're talking about did something very similar and deprived himself of all sense or whatever, and then lost who he was? And this kind of like in his own mind powerfully built us. And we are basically a waking dream. Yeah. And so that is a possibility that comes across, when you start to, now I know that just the very thought or mention of that scares the hell out of some people, and they freak out and they're just like, oh no, I can't go, because it's not the Old Testament and whatever the hell they want to, but that's fine. Believe what you want to believe. And I'm not saying this is what I believe. And I'm not saying that this is, the truth. I'm just saying that what if that's what the Gnostics were pointing to? Now, The problem with this subject is every time anybody says anything about it, You get people who are fundamentalists who don't even want to entertain the idea that this could be a possibility. I'm not saying that it's the truth. I'm not even saying I believe this. This is not my belief. I'm just saying that maybe that's what they were believing, because maybe with our own minds we can create. Because if you go below the atom, and I've said this before, there's nothing there. So this is all really just an agreed upon illusion. And until someone has gone down into the alternate realities and has gone into those worlds, which I have, then they're not really qualified to sit there and tell me, well, this is what it is and blah, blah, blah. I had a long conversation with a guy who's a molecular biologist. His name's Edgar, and he's a cool guy, and he's got the same name as Edgar Casey. And I told him about Edgar Casey. He didn't know who that was. And I told Edgar, I said, look, we've been friends since 1998. I was talking to him recently. I say recently, probably about a year ago. But that goes back to time, being old, whatever. So I told him, I said, look, we've been friends for a long time, but yet you've never ingested a mushroom. You've never taken a hit of LSD. You've never done anything but maybe drink some beer. So when you talk about people being on drugs or having any sort of anything at all, you talk of it as in like it's this alien thing because you've never done it. And he says, and I never will. And I said, and then you will never understand what I'm talking about. You cannot write a paper about it. You cannot really, you could observe it. And you could, but until you've done it, which is something that gives you a whole nother perspective on there's nothing you can do. You can just speculate because you don't know what it feels like. It would be very easy to find out. He's a healthy guy. He doesn't have high blood pressure. He doesn't have any of these issues. So, I told him, I said, why not try it? And he says, I will never do that. I said, okay, then you're not really qualified to proselytize to me about what the nature of reality is because you don't know. And I told him, I said, being in that chamber, I was actually in there for 6 hours, not almost 6 hours. And to me, apparently each hour was like a day. I felt like I was in there for a week. I said, what day is it? I thought for sure it was Tuesday because because it was a Saturday night. And that's how it felt to me. That realm of where I went to, and if you slip into a quantitative state, is that a word? I don't know. Is that a word? Quantitative state or a quantitative reality, a smaller reality where you kind of become like something small and time moves differently. It felt like time was moving a lot faster for me. But it was like I was just out of my body and moving around in this darkness. And now I know what light looks like. I know what the concept of light is. So I created it. So in my mind now, there's no way, like Daniel said, to try to say, hey, let's say that this really happened. To hell, nobody knows. It could just be something crazy that my mind was doing. But if you look at pictures of the synapses in the brain, it looks like the cosmos. Has anybody ever seen that? Like side by side? I mean, that's what it looks like. And so whenever you're sitting in this deprived state of being, which I don't recommend unless you have a really strong will and a strong mind, because you could seriously slip off. They turn the lights on and you're in your own world. I mean, you've created an entire world. There were these blue-like beings that were building this plastic straw-like world that I had in my mind that I was, where this came from, I have no idea. In the deepest recesses of your thought processes, I have no idea. But it was happening, and they were building a world, and then there was like this little mini sun that was probably about the size of that. And I was like, okay, cool. I've now crafted a sun, and I've created heat for these beings and all this other stuff. What if these beings were something else, maybe like a type of machine elf? I don't know. And maybe they just showed up. But I could give you a whole I could write a book about what happened to me. And this was not with DMT. This was with two different types of hallucinogens. And this was years ago. Like I said, I haven't done anything. I don't even drink Monsters. I don't do anything. I'm completely straight edge, and I'm absolutely sober. A little bonkers, maybe, yeah. Of course, for the wear of what I've been through. But I believe that you have the power with your mind, body, spirit connection. You can pretty much do anything. And that is because God gave us that. Now, when you talk about what could be the essence, mind, and power of God, it freaks people out and they bail. They get scared. They go, oh, no, I can't handle this, because there might be something that'll make me go, oh, maybe I should question the nature of my reality. People are so terrified. And it's really a cowardice thing too, because people, and I'm included with that, because sometimes people will talk about things and I'm like, oh crap, I'm uncomfortable here. It doesn't happen now, it used to, and I don't want to hear it. Because then you start to think, hey man, I got to question the nature of reality.
Yeah.
I got to question, what is, and reality. And so that when Daniel was talking about that is something that people always shy away from, because they don't understand it, and they're never going to, because they won't take that step. But I'm not going to sit here and encourage anyone to do that. And I encourage my friend who's a molecular biologist to do it because he wanted to write about it. And so I told him, I said, if you're going to write about something like that, I can tell you all about it and you can write a whole book about it. But if you want to really know, then you need to do it yourself. That's what I told him. Yeah. So just to clarify, I'm not here telling people, hey, man, we all know you can go take the F train, talk to a guy. No, I'm just kidding. Tell them the kids are writing it down. Yeah, that's how we get cracked. No, I'm joking. Okay. People will go and they'll be like, Josh Turner said that if I pop these drugs, I could create a whole world because I'm sick of living in the one I'm in. Okay. Just give me a padded cell and some drugs and I'm fine. No, you'll eventually sober up and the light pollution will come in and you'll have problems. But what I'm saying, though, is through deprivation, somehow light became something that I understood. It was a concept that I understood because I'm not blind. And so I created it with my mind. And there was light everywhere. There was an entire world going on within that room. And I was living in that world. And these little beings were asking me all kinds of questions. And I was giving them an answer. And they were creating an entire world based on what I was telling them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Totally get what you're saying. We are actually at the over 2 hour mark, and Monica Rawlings, she's coming on here in about 10-15 minutes. So we don't like to step on toes, and we appreciate everybody showing up tonight.
Absolutely. It's been a really good time. I mean, like we've talked about before, UFOs, we love to talk about it, even though it is not in our wheelhouse. I mean, we're still learning, but it's great to learn all this stuff that goes with it. It's fantastic information. If you're looking for more from Daniel, just go to YouTube and look up The Vortex. I have put the link out there several times tonight. You can just go check him out and check out his videos. So don't forget that. If you've not subscribed to Blondes or Booze or Paranormal Roundtable, please do that. We'd appreciate it. And until tomorrow, everybody.
Yeah. Well, somebody's asking for what channel, what Monica's going to be on. Monica, actually, she's on Texas Front Porch. So she
Texas Front Porch. Yes, she is.
On Thursday nights after us. So head over to Texas Front Porch and catch her show. Josh, once again, thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Josh. We always appreciate you coming.
Yep. And Daniel, thank you for coming on. We'll have to have you back because there's a whole lot of more questions that we didn't even get to. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Appreciate being on.
Told you Daniel was a good guest.
Yes, he's great. Thank you all. Good night.
See you tomorrow.